Okay, class, good morning or good afternoon. This is my third attempt at this. We're going to do things a little bit different today for the test review because I wanted to use a share screen feature. So there's a lot going on this week. We've had several assignments, but most importantly, we have a test on Friday, and that test is going to occur between 1 and 2 p.m. And I wanted to make sure you knew how to that you understood how to access that. And then I'll do a brief review, and I'll leave you to it to get ready. So let me go to a share screen function here. I guess we could start off with the easy one. That today is Thursday, May 7th, day 19 of our Civil Rights Unit with the test tomorrow between 1 and 2 p.m. So, new share. Sorry, talking my way through this. All right, I want to show you first off how to get to your test. So I'm showing you the top of the fourth period's class. I don't know if you knew this, but I explained it back when in the third quarter, right when we opened up the Google Classrooms, that every class has its own unique photo at the top. So this one happens to just be Cedar Point at night. But anyway, I'm in fourth period class. And I had set up on Wednesday a practice test form. So on the actual test day, what you'll see is in your assignments, you will see an assignment pop up at 1 o'clock on Friday. You've got to be ready sitting at your computer at 1 o'clock on Friday because it's going to close at 2 o'clock on Friday. I know, understand, and accept that you are going to be looking things up in your notes and on the internet for this test. That's fine. But you've only got 1 hour to do it. If I give 24 hours for you to do it, there's way too much ability to be talking to each other, to be looking everything up. If we lock it down between 1 and 2, I think the test is going to be a little bit more secure. But that also means that if you don't log in and get that done by 2, you're going to have a 0 out of 50. If we have excused reasons, then we'll set up a different test, but it will be an entirely different test. I have a lot of different test forms I can use. So this is what it will look like. It'll say, real test, unit 1011 real test, and then you will click on it. And so when you click on it, and hopefully you are seeing this screen, you would click on that form and it would take you straight to the test. Now, the header on the real test is going to be a little bit different. I think it's a picture, the version I'm using is a picture of the counter used in the 1960 North Carolina sit-ins. And you just answer the question. So was this easy to click on? Yes. Will you study for the Friday's test? Of course. And then, and only after you are done, you hit submit. Now, on the real test, there's going to be 34 multiple choice questions, just like always. 2 short answer questions, where 2 sentences should do the trick, and 1 extended response, where we're looking for 4 complete sentences to answer the question. So it's just like a normal test, except done in this format. Short answer and extended response, you just type in. When you are done, and only when you're done, you submit. Then it will say, we're all set. It may or may not let you view score, but remember, it's only going to score your multiple choice. It has no idea how to grade written responses, so it just marks those wrong. I go through and grade those by hand. I don't want you to worry about that in any way, shape, or form. But once you submit, you cannot resubmit. So make sure you do not submit until you are all set. So let's talk about what's going to be on this test. See if we can switch screens. There we go. So I tell you this at the beginning of every unit. This is not new. The terms that we have at the beginning of the unit, I don't care if you know them at the start. I care a great deal if you know them at the end. It is not a completely inclusive list of everything on the test, but it gives you a good idea if you know your material. So here we have many of the terms that you will see. And there are some big things on here to make sure that you know, because they're on every version of the test, and a lot of them are the tougher short answer, extended response. And I'll start at the top with AIM, and that's the American Indian Movement. When you have an organization like that, you've got to know what the letters stand for. You can't just say AIM. You have to say American Indian Movement. And you should know at least one objective of them. So AIM represented Native Americans, and they had objectives such as, I think probably the easiest one would be They wanted land back. There were a lot of treaties that showed that Native Americans had rights to lands that currently the US government holds. So they wanted land back. They wanted to remove offensive mascots from teams. Now, there are other organizations like this. So I'll skip down. NOW, National Organization of Women. You may get a version of the test with that, or you may have a choice. But you'd have to know, again, National Organization of Women. You'd have to know what those letters stand for. Of course, they represent women and their issues. And so what would be a goal of theirs? A goal might be equal pay, because women were getting only about 59% of the pay of men, and today it's somewhere in the 80s. It's not what it should be, which is 100%. Or it could be a goal of more representatives in Congress, things like that. Do not say voting rights. That women have voting rights and have had them for this year 100 years. So you're way off track if you say that. United Farm Workers. So again, UFW, what's that stand for? United Farm Workers. That's Cesar Chavez, his Hispanic American Rights Organization. What was something they wanted? They wanted better treatment for agricultural workers. They wanted bilingual education. Those are some examples. There are other groups that are just as important that I didn't happen to list because I can only list so many, and I had emphasized early on the civil rights movement. I wanted to have some from the other sections, but the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, is absolutely huge because that's who all these other groups are emulating. SNCC, which is a subsidiary of the SCLC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also very important. So let's go through a couple court cases. Brown versus Board is the 1954 decision that desegregated the schools. It overturned a horrific 1896 decision called Plessy versus Ferguson. And again, this is all from that very beginning unit back in April for the original African-American civil rights movement. And you have terms like boycott. This is how Dr. King often gained the attention of the larger society by having that economic power. When you boycott something, you refuse an economic good or service. So the bus boycott. There were other boycotts as well. For example, the United Farm Workers asked consumers to boycott grapes. So it, again, started by Dr. King and the civil rights movement, emulated by others. Freedom Riders. These were groups of people who got on Greyhound buses and did sit-ins and other forms of civil disobedience throughout the South to fight for desegregation or integration. Civil disobedience, that is a big one on the test because you'll have to know things like, well, why was civil disobedience so effective? Why was this passive resistance, this peaceful protest so powerful? Because one, it highlighted the violence of the oppressor, it showed where the real problem was. And two, it created empathy for the cause. Very big, important lecture on that material. Little Rock Nine. 9 students from Little Rock, Arkansas, who in 1957 desegregated this large urban Southern school district. Martyr. Unfortunately, too many examples in this unit. Somebody who dies for the cause that they believe in and are fighting for. Some martyrs are not terribly famous. They didn't ever dream they would be martyrs. Medgar Evers or there's just Emmett Till. There's just too many to think of. If you want to go with ones that are easy to remember, Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X. Those are people who died fighting for civil rights. Do not be tricked into just picking somebody who died. Like I said in the lecture, Rosa Parks, very important, but died of old age. So very important leader, very significant person, not a martyr. Let's see, I want to stick to civil rights. Feminine Mystique, Civil Rights for Women. This is a novel that made many women sort of become more aware of really the women's rights movement. Bilingual education, one of the objectives of the United Farm Workers. Okay, moving on to a little bit more of 11. What were some of the things that other groups were fighting for? Well, first off, the individuals who represent the counterculture are the hippies. Counterculture means they believe in things that are opposite of the regular culture. So if the culture says, go to school and get a job and get married, the counterculture says, drop out of school, don't worry about a job, and certainly don't worry about getting married, things like that. Hippies are the sort of stereotypical representatives of that. Gerrymandering, I'm letting you skip, so let me cross that one out. Generation gap. That's the difference between how you grew up and how your parents grew up. Every generation has a generation gap, but the hippies had a bigger generation gap than almost any other generation I can think of. Their parents grew up in the Depression and World War II. These kids are the baby boomers that appear after World War II, and they just have an entirely different life experience. And so there's a lot of tension there between those two. Did I get all the terms? I don't want to forget any. Okay, lots of people. So Thurgood Marshall, the primary lawyer for Brown versus Board of Education, went on to become the first African-American Supreme Court justice. Rosa Parks, symbol of the Montgomery bus boycott, the originator of the case that starts the boycott in and of itself, led by Dr. King, next individual listed, who was inspired by Gandhi. So, and a civil rights leader in India. And so again, these are all interrelated. John F. Kennedy, president from 1961 to 1963, assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. I guess indications say that he was in favor of civil rights, but he's really slow to truly support it. Did in June of 63, assassinated November of 63. Pushed into civil rights to making a stand by his younger brother, who was a much clearer civil rights activist, Bobby Kennedy, who ran for president in his own right in 1968 and was assassinated. Let's see, I let you skip James Meredith, certainly important, was African-American Air Force veteran who desegregated the University of Mississippi. But again, in this format, we had to cut a few things out here and there. Lyndon Johnson took over the presidency for JFK when he was assassinated, helped push through some important civil rights legislation to some degree to honor JFK. Malcolm X, second in charge, but the spokesman for the Nation of Islam, representing a more militant, a more less likely to accept passive resistance strategy. Stokely Carmichael, a little bit more in the vein of Malcolm X, took over the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in '66, and then said violence is an acceptable format for the Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, so a clear turn there. Listen, the best thing to do here is to just go through these notes or these lectures that are, backlogged in the classroom stream and just double check. Either take the notes, and you can even mute me, or just watch and don't take the notes as long as you get that information. That's what counts to me. Can you get the information and be ready to test yourself on whether or not you're aware of it? I don't want to emphasize the cases too much, but I think one of the tougher parts, if you're not prepared for it, would be these court cases. And I say that because most of you are not very familiar with these other court cases, and they'll appear to some degree on the test. So these are other civil rights breakthroughs that are not necessarily African-American civil rights, but civil rights in general, inspired by, and often obviously affecting African-American civil rights. So I don't, again, want to overemphasize this, but it's certainly going to be on the test, and I think it's going to be something that traditionally is hard for students to test on because you're unfamiliar with it. Like you might be more familiar with, obviously, Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott or Freedom Riders. So the first one is Baker versus Carr. This said legislative districts had to be roughly equal in population. That's pretty important because urban areas, which often have more minorities, were underrepresented. Engel versus Vitale. School-sponsored prayer was illegal. It was not considered proper from this point on to have a public school advocating or appearing to advocate for any particular religion. Miranda versus Arizona, the idea that you had to be made aware of your rights, that you had a right to an attorney. And if you did not get that right explained to you, unless you explicitly waived it, anything you said could not be used against you. Now, of course, you're thinking of your Miranda rights where it can be. Yes, if you read your rights and then you waive them, then what you say can be used against you. I do want to be clear, though, just like I said in the lecture, Miranda makes it so that you can't be interrogated without being told and or waiving your rights, that you know that you have a right to an attorney. If they have video of me robbing a bank, if they have my fingerprints, I'm still in big trouble, whether they've read me my Miranda rights or not. Roe versus Wade. This is the court decision in 73 that said abortions are legal given certain circumstances. There are restrictions, but a woman has the right to an abortion. Probably the most controversial decision on here. Regents of the University of California versus Bakke. This said that quote unquote reverse discrimination is not legal. That race can be a factor in things like college admissions, but it cannot be the determining factor. So those are some court cases you're probably not as familiar with. But again, that's just one part of the test. There's some big concepts out there. I want you to go through those lectures and go through those notes. Make sure that you have, some things written down or some knowledge. Everybody's a little different how much you need to write down. Be ready. This test is happening Friday from 1 to 2. Okay? So hope everybody prepares for it, takes it seriously, and we want to get you that credit for second semester U.S. history. It's just, I know things are crazy. It's just going to be a lot easier if you get the credit this year as opposed to having to take it over through Edmentum or something like that next year. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay safe. Be ready for that test.